Top 10 Most Dangerous Countries in the World. There are areas in the world that are preferable to stay away from if you wish to live in safety and peace, even though something horrible could happen to you there, even in the statistically safest nations. Although a low score on the index doesn't necessarily indicate a high risk of violence, Thomas Morgan, the Associate Director of Research at IEP, writes in an email that being ranked among the 10 least peaceful countries almost always means that a country is involved in an ongoing conflict, has high levels of violence, or is highly militaristic. What are the top 10 dangerous nations in the world, then? According to the IEP index, they are listed here from least to most harmful. Number 10. Russia. According to the IEP research, Russia didn't experience an internal armed war, unlike the majority of the other countries in the bottom 10 for peacefulness, but it did experience one of the highest rises in violent protests. Russians went to the streets in response to the assassination and incarceration of opposition leader Alexei Navalny, despite police attempts to forcibly disperse them. According to the IEP report, more than 500 people were arrested. On the plus side, regular Russians who aren't rebelling against the Kremlin don't necessarily think living there is unsafe. Less than 10% of people had experienced violence, and just 21% of people reported they are extremely concerned about becoming a victim of violent crime. Number 9. The Central African Republic. According to the IEP research, in 2020, violence cost the Central African Republic, CR, 37% of its GDP. In his campaign for re-election, President Faustin Archange Touadéra charged that François Bozizé had attempted a coup with rebel organizations. The National Elections Authority announced President Touadéra as the victor on January 4, 2021. According to the UN Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, allies of previous President Bozizé attacked cities despite the 2019 peace agreement between the government and 14 non-state armed groups. The violence and unrest that followed the elections in December 2020 forced almost 20% of the country's inhabitants to flee, with some of them entering the neighboring countries of Cameroon, Chad, and the Republic of Congo. Within CAR, another 164,000 people are displaced. Number 8. Libya. According to Human Rights Watch, hundreds of civilians were killed, went missing, and thousands were displaced during a 15-month battle between armed factions that concluded in June 2020. But a year later, the IEP study claims that the African country is still plagued by severe civil turmoil and political instability. According to research cited by IEP, about 45% of Libyans have personally encountered violence in the previous 2 years, and more than 25% consider violence to be the biggest risk in their everyday existence. On the travel risk map created by health and security management company International SOS, the nation is rated as having an extreme degree of risk for tourists. Number 7. Democratic Republic of the Congo. According to the IEP research, one reason Congo entered the list in 2020 was to deteriorating relations with neighboring Zambia over disputed land, which resulted in border conflicts between the two nations' armed forces. 9% of Congo's GDP was lost due to violence. The U.S. State Department rates Congo as a low-risk country as of November 30, 2021. Reconsider traveling to this country, as violent crime, such as armed robberies, home invasions, and assaults, are frequent and local authorities are under-equipped to deal with severe crimes. Attackers might adopt a police or security agent persona. Number 6. Somalia. It was the scene of the 1993 brutal battle between American Special Forces and the militia of a warlord in Somalia, which served as the basis for Mark Bowden's book Black Hawk Down, a story of modern war and the film adaptation. But Somalia is still a deadly country more than 25 years later. Kidnapping, murder, and other violent crimes are frequent in Somalia, according to the U.S. State Department, which also notes that terrorists continue to target airports, governmental structures, hotels, shopping areas, and pretty much anywhere else that people gather, with attacks by car bombs, mortars, and suicide bombers. 20% of the people in the African country are now internally displaced, as a result of the ongoing struggle between the government and the extremist organization Al-Shabaab. The violence has cost 34.9% of the country's economic output, according to the IEP report. Number 5. Iraq. According to the IEP's report, the Middle Eastern country has been one of the 5 least peaceful countries in the world since 2015. IEP reports that terrorism deaths have decreased with the defeat of ISIS, but as of November 22, 2021, the U.S. State Department assigns Iraqi U.S. nationals in Iraq are at high risk for violence and kidnapping, according to the Do Not Go rating. Both the Iraqi security forces and civilians are frequently attacked by terrorist and rebel organizations. In all of Iraq, anti-American sectarian militias pose a threat to Western businesses and American citizens. Improvised explosive device (IED) attacks take place all over the nation, including in Baghdad. According to Lloyd's Register Foundation research, less than 1/3 of Iraqis think that their government does a good job of providing clean water, food, and reliable electricity. Number 4. South Sudan. According to the U.S. State Department, 4 million people have fled their homes as a result of abuses against civilians, including appalling levels of sexual violence, since South Sudan became independent from Sudan in 2011. However, disagreements between the two nations continue to keep South Sudan tense. According to the IEP research, the African nation's GNP was reduced by violence by 40% in 2020. Number 3. Syria. Because President Bashar al-Assad has strengthened his hold on power, the Middle Eastern nation's political stability has improved to some extent. IEP's research notes that despite this, Syria is now more at risk from terrorism, and in 2020, ISIS and al-Qaeda repeatedly attacked the nation. Syria suffered the worst economic consequences from the war, losing 82% of its economic production. A humanitarian crisis was caused by the civil war, which lasted 10 years. In what has evolved into the greatest refugee crisis in decades, the United Nations Refugee Agency estimates that 5.5 million people, many of them children, have fled Syria since the fighting began. Number 2. Yemen. Since 2008, the country in the Persian Gulf has become less calm, according to IEP. According to the Council on Foreign Relations, 100,000 people have died in a civil conflict between a coalition led by Saudi Arabia and Houthi rebels who are supported by Iran since 2015. Additionally, violent crime is a growing problem in Yemen. Internally displaced individuals make up around 13% of the population. According to surveys, 51% of Yemenis think they are less protected now than they were before. Yemen was ranked last in the world in the Lloyd's Register Foundation World Risk Poll, which was held in 2019, in the population's opinion of how well the government provided safe food, water, and reliable electricity. Number 1. Afghanistan. Even before the Western-backed government of the South Asian nation collapsed, and Taliban insurgents abruptly took control in the summer of 2021, Afghanistan earned the unwelcome distinction of being the least peaceful place on the earth for the 4th year in a row on the IEP's index. It has the most impact on terrorism of any nation, even though both that rate and the number of people dying from internal strife had decreased recently, according to IEP. Few people have been allowed to leave the country since the Taliban took control, and according to Human Rights Watch, Taliban forces have executed former officials and invaded the houses of journalists, activists, and human rights defenders. The rights of women and girls are being violated, and many women who held positions of leadership in the past have been fired. In 2020, Afghanistan's GDP was consumed by violence to the tune of 40%. In Afghanistan, there are ongoing military conflicts as well as serious crime issues. According to a 2019 Gallup poll, only 13% of Afghans felt secure going alone at night, and 50% reported having their money or goods taken. For citizens and/or visitors, the absence of peace in the low-ranked nations might be problematic. According to Morgan, this depends on the nation and the kind of violence. It is feasible for there to be a concentration of violent crime in some areas, while there is relative safety in others. However, generally speaking, a nation near the bottom of the index is likely to be engaged in an open conflict, making peace a problem for both citizens and visitors. So, do you like this video? Give your answer in comments section below. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more videos.